Hello, we are back this week with another set of Koans, starting with Koan number 20, things that feel funny and kind of good. So this is essentially, I think of this as a set of instructions in the form of 3 photographs. Because my hope is that when people read the title, things that feel funny and kind of good, and think, what the hell is he talking about? And then look at the pictures, and you're like, what? That just looks like painful. He's kissing a cactus. That's weird. And then maybe you try it, and you're like, that does feel funny and kind of good. And it's like a new sensory experience for you, which I think is at least one of the things that art is about, right? Like creating new sensory experiences, and this is one that you can do yourself at home. In this first image here, like pushing my whatever this is, this little ridge, if you get the right spot here, like this little ridge between your eyebrows, you kind of like push up in the middle of it. Ooh. I'm not getting this the right. There it is. Oh yeah, you have to like kind of push hard. And that's the best way I can describe it, is that it feels funny and it feels kind of good. And so I think I had just discovered that. I'm sure that's like a known thing to, you know, anybody interested in pressure points and stuff like that. But I think I just discovered that accidentally one day and thought, well, what else feels funny and kind of good? And these are 2 other things that I discovered. So there you go. Do try this at home. Alright, Koan number 21, Mixed Up Muybridge. This was kind of something discovered by accident one day. Sylvia I think she was like doing an assignment for a class where she had to make a GIF for some reason, an animated GIF, and she exported it, and we were like, that doesn't look quite right, and we discovered that it was because the frames were out of order, and I was like, that's pretty cool, and I wanted to kind of explore that idea of taking animated GIFs and just kind of mixing them up. So, of course, I chose the iconic Edward Muybridge series of horse galloping photographs. Muybridge was, famous for these sequences of photographs depicting various things in motion. It was kind of a proto-cinema thing, and this horse galloping is kind of the iconic beginning of motion pictures. So at the top left here is the normal frame by frame in the correct order, and then down here is the same thing in reverse, and then the other 2 are with the frames all mixed up. And one thing that has always kind of stuck in my brain about this Koan is that I don't like that it's a little bit obfuscated about what's going on and how to do it. I think almost every other Koan, it's either completely obvious and self-evident from the Koan itself about like what is going on and how, and it's something that you can do yourself, or if it's a little more technically involved, like the one we looked at last week, Our Sweet Baby. If you watch the video of the performance, I explain exactly what's going on at the beginning of the performance. I really hate obfuscation in art, meaning I don't like it when it's not clear how this thing is being made or what's going on. I go to a lot of noise shows, experimental sound, and so much of it is like, somebody sitting behind a table turning knobs on a synthesizer or whatever. And it sounds awesome, but at the same time, it's like, I want to know what exactly is happening. I feel like that just involves me so much more in what I'm hearing if I know how it's being done. And this Koan, I've always thought was like, didn't quite meet my criteria at the time for not being totally obfuscated. So I thought I would take this opportunity to show you at home how to do this yourself. It's actually very easy. You just have to have a little bit of knowledge of image editing, but I'll show you how to do it. So you need a image editing software like Photoshop as an example, but Photoshop is very expensive and it's proprietary and all that. So I like to use a software called GIMP, which is free as in freedom and free as in no cost. So let me pull up GIMP here. There it is. So you can download GIMP for free. I think the website is gimp.org. It stands for GNU Image Manipulation Program. And it's like a free equivalent of Photoshop. And I have already opened here in GIMP one of these GIFs. So you could, save this one, or you can find a GIF of your own online, save it, and then open that file up in GIMP. And you'll see over here on the right these layers. So if you've worked with like Photoshop or something like that, you're probably familiar with layers. So how an animated GIF works is that each frame of the animation is actually a different layer, and when you save it, it just and then open the GIF, it just kind of replaces one layer with another one at a time, so you get the illusion of animation. So if I turn off the visibility of these layers here, you'll see it looks pretty much like if you watch the horse, it looks like it's animating as I turn on each layer one by one. So the key thing here is that when you save this GIF, it will animate in the order of these frames, starting from the bottom to the top. So if you click and drag these frames and kind of just mix them up, you can reorder them, or you can click one and then click the arrows, up and down arrows here to move that layer up and down, and just kind of randomly move these around. And once you're satisfied, you then go to File, Export as, not save, but export, and just make sure you're saving it as a GIF, and you can change the name of it. Export. And in your options here, make sure you click As Animation. And you can there's other options here. You can just leave these settings as is. You probably want to make sure Loop Forever is checked. and then export. And then let's see, where did I save that desktop? You're not gonna be able to see this, are you? Let me see if I can add a window to my thing as I'm recording. So I'm gonna get the image open so that you can actually see it, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so here it is. That's the image that I just messed with and saved. You will have no problems opening it. I was just having some issues because of the recording software I'm using. I had to make sure that it was open in a window that was actually being recorded. There it is, and I think it would be really cool if you know, we had just a bunch of mixed up GIFs on the web. Coffee. Sylvia had to run and meet with a client, so I have baby Hank here with me. Say hello. Say hello to Grandma, because she's probably the only one watching these videos. Hello, Grandma. Love you. Oh, come here, buddy. I love you. Alright. Should we tell them about the next Koan? It is Koan number 22, trying to keep myself out of the picture. So this, watch out for the mic, duder. Oh no. What's good? What do you love? You wanna be like this? Oh dear. Alright, trying to keep myself out of the picture, which is a video of me running down the street, recording with my cell phone, and trying to keep my shadow out of the picture, which is just a ridiculous exercise and obviously not really possible. And even if I did keep my shadow out of the picture, I'm holding the camera, it's me recording, I'm running down the street, every jostle of the camera is my body in motion. So this is very much an impossible exercise. This is the first of, I think it's the first of what I would kind of classify as endurance Koans, I guess. There's at least, I don't know, a half dozen other Koans that involve me performing some physical action to the point where I become exhausted. This one is actually kind of a metaphor in response to a very specific event, which I will describe to you. I've never revealed this about this Koan before. So around this time we had an MFA exhibition, and the piece that I showed in the exhibition was called Not Pictured, and it was just a big mirror, like a 4-foot by 6-foot mirror, something like that. And on the mirror was text that I had written that was in recognition of several MFA students who were not in the exhibition because they had either dropped out of the program or they were just AWOL, like they just kind of disappeared and nobody knows what happened to them because of issues like addiction, depression, bipolar. We even had somebody with associative dissociative identity disorder, and it seemed like just one by one we were losing people to these various mental disorders. And I was myself dealing with issues, and the piece was this sense of absence that I was feeling at the time with all these people who were my friends and my fellow artists and fellow students who were just not there anymore. And it kind of seemed like the school as an institution was like, just moving on. So it was just a one-day exhibition. So the smear was displayed, and then at the end of the day, there was a reception, and so I concluded this piece by taking the mirror into the reception and holding it up. Whoops, I'm sorry, Duder. Careful. Daddy has to be careful with this baby. There. Holding the mirror up with two hands until, this is another endurance thing, holding it up until I just couldn't hold it up any longer, at which point I would drop it to the ground and set it down and walk away. That was the plan. And the text that was on the mirror said exactly that I would do this. So people were expecting this to happen. What happened instead was I took the mirror into the reception and held it up, and people were, reading the mirror. People were interacting with me a bit, and Gary Kolb, who was the dean of the School of Communication, my dean, obviously was not liking this. He looked very concerned. He was kind of having little powwows with other people, looking my way, trying to figure out what they should do about this. And he came over and was kind of hovering right over me for the duration of this performance. And at the point where I was about to set the mirror down, he like kicked the mirror. He I don't know. He kicked the mirror with his foot and then grabbed it from me, and then took it over and hid it behind a chair so that no one could see it. Which is just insane to me. If it was just an issue of maybe he was concerned that the mirror was going to break when I dropped it or something, which it definitely wasn't. I had this, it's not amateur hour here. I had this rehearsed. I knew exactly how it was going to go down. I was going to set the mirror down, lay it gently down on the floor. If he was concerned about safety, whatever, that's one thing that I could maybe understand. But the fact that he took the mirror from me and went and hid it behind a chair is just insane, especially considering the content of the piece, which was about, bringing to light these mental health issues that many of us were dealing with. So that happened, and then later that week, he called me into his office. And he did a lot of talking, and I pretty much just sat there. And in this meeting, he, obviously he made it clear that he did not approve of what I had done, obviously. And also, he took this opportunity to tell me that he didn't see any reason why anyone would make art about themselves. He said that when he was an MFA student, he had a fellow student who was a woman who made art about her relationships with her boyfriend and such, and that he was always like, why would you make art? Like, no one cares about you and your relationships. Yes, he actually told me that. This guy, by the way, is a landscape photographer, so that maybe tells you something about his views about art. So he just left it at that, and made it clear that he was not a fan of people making art about themselves. So this piece, this Koan, is pretty much my response to that. It's like, okay, what do you want me to do? I'm very much influenced by early video art, which is essentially, much of it is just artists turning the camera on themselves and performing in front of the camera, doing some performative action. So it's like, what do you want me to do? Okay, I'll turn the camera outward. How about that? I'm going to do this performative thing, but I'm going to turn the camera out and just fucking, don't say fucking, Hank, just run down the street and with the camera pointed outward and try to keep myself completely out of the picture, which obviously is impossible. Even if you're a landscape photographer, Gary Kolb, you can't keep yourself out of the picture because you choose the frame. The whole episode was just insane. So this Koan is kind of a metaphor for the exhaustion of trying to meet expectations that people might have for you, even when those expectations are impossible. Koan number 23, Clothespin. If you've never watched this Koan before, I would highly suggest you stop and watch it first and then come back to the commentary. It's only a few minutes long. So I would consider this a structural film or a structural video if you're being particular. Structural film was a movement that started in the 60s, and it was really my first exposure to experimental filmmaking. There was a film series in Kansas City called Electromediascope, and it was curated by Gwen Widmer and Patrick Clancy, two photographers who had been friends with the filmmaker Hollis Frampton, who was one of the original structural filmmakers. And I took a photography class with Gwen, and she invited me to this screening, and I was like, it was really sincerely life-changing for me. It's one of the events in my life that I can actually pinpoint and say this specific event changed my direction in life. It influenced me so much, I saw that screening shortly before going to grad school,
And so when I came to grad school, at first it was like that's what I wanted to do: photography and structural filmmaking. Structural film was first defined and identified by P. Adam Sidney, who was a scholar. He was friends with lots of experimental filmmakers in the 60s, 70s, and he wrote a book called Visionary Film. And that's where he first defined structural film, and he has his own definition of what it is. But I have created a definition that I use, and that is, I consider a structural film to be a film that is contains its own language. So most filmmaking, like Hollywood films and whatever French New Wave or whatever kind of movement of filmmaking you look at, it is a language, right? It has a filmic language that has to be learned. So there are documented examples of adults who have never seen any kind of film or video or television or anything before in their life, being shown like a Hollywood style motion picture and not understanding it, because that style of filmmaking, you have to learn how to understand that. You have to learn by viewing lots of examples that this type of cut means time has passed, or when we cut from one person to the other in the same location, it means one thing, or you have to learn this style of cutting back and forth means simultaneous action in different locations, etc. So structural film, my definition is that the language of the film is inherent in the film itself, so that you can watch a structural film and by the end of the film you understand how to watch it. Like a structural film teaches you its own language through the process of watching it. So this Koan Clothespin, it's just a single take of me squeezing a clothespin open and closed and walking toward and away from the camera. So there's a structure there. There's a structure that you learn from watching the film, and at the end of it, you know something that you didn't know before. So I think if you've never seen this before, at this beginning part, when I'm, squeezing the clothespin far away from the camera, I think you can't hear it, even though it's actually audible in the sound of the video. Your brain doesn't really register it. And then I go up close to the camera and squeeze it, so that you hear that actually this clothespin has a sound. If you listen closely enough, there's a sound that this clothespin makes. So then at the end, when I go away from the camera and squeeze it again, suddenly you can hear it. It's very faint, it's very quiet, but you are more likely to hear the clothespin at the end of the film than at the beginning of the film, even though it's the same level of audio. That's the Koan. That's Koan number 23, Clothespin. Koan number 24. Oh gosh, it's another one of these. Meditation on the Holy Mystery of the Road CD Part 3, in which I drill holes in the CD. And this one, actually, I succeed in creating the holes. So there's kind of like layers of success and failure in this one, because really with all of these different things I was trying, drilling and punching and all that, I was purposely trying to come up with stuff that I knew wasn't right, that it wouldn't work. And so it's almost kind of a failure that I actually succeeded in making holes in this CD. I think I thought that drilling the hole in it would just like make it crack in half or something, but it actually did create 2 holes the same size as the holes in the original CD. But it's also not really a success, because it's obviously not the way that these holes happen, right? It's pretty clean, and these holes are not drill holes; they're something else. So it's a around the hole. Failure, success, failure. Koan number 25, 10-second improvs. Carry an audio recorder with you throughout the day, and at designated times or whenever you feel like it, perform a short improvisation with whatever materials are around you, then string them all together. I think this is actually really successful as far as instructions for people to perform as part of their just everyday activity. It takes 10 seconds out of your life every hour or whatever, however often you want to do it. And really anyone can do it as long as you have some kind of audio recording device. So for most people, that's going to be a smartphone. And I think most audio recording apps on your phone allow you to pause a recording and come back to it later, so that you could record 10 seconds, pause, an hour, 2 hours later, whatever, hit record again, and it will just keep adding to that recording. And so you don't even have to do like any audio editing or anything to like edit all the clips together. You could just record it all in one track. So it's really fun actually to listen back even 5 years later. I can pretty much distinctly remember what each sound was and where I was when I created it. So it's a really nice documentation of your day, even though it's a completely you're just making abstract sound improvisations. It becomes actually really concrete when you listen back. So let me turn up the sound, and I'm actually not sure what that part is, but this next section, that's a big sliding doors in the MFA studio, and that is a bottle of water that was in my car that just had a little bit of water in it, and I'm just shaking it. That is I think that's a locker door, like in the basement of the comm building, and that's just me making crazy vocalizations. And this is obviously it's a car radio, and I did this a lot just kind of as a improvised sound thing while I was driving. Just unfortunately, a lot of cars have this stuff like in a menu now, but my car at the time had like actual sliders for bass and treble and mid-range, and so I would just kind of like slide those sliders up and down, creating the effect you hear there. So it's another one that you should try at home. Koan number 26, chamber music. So this is like the third Koan so far in this group that has to do with sound. As it says, it's sounds coming from a manhole late at night. Very similarly to Clothespin, this is a sound that you can only hear if you get really close to this manhole cover. This was right outside our house in Carbondale, and I would park my car sometimes and get out and think I hear this sound of water, but it was really faint, and eventually I realized it was coming from the manhole. And if you get really close, you can hear what you hear here in the recording. So this is, it's essentially crap and pee and stuff. And I think in listening to this, if you actually, stick with it and you sit down and listen to the whole 8-minute duration, it becomes kind of mesmerizing. It becomes kind of meditative, while at the same time you're almost kind of forced to think about the source of these sounds and what might be happening simultaneously at the moment of the recording to produce these sounds. At around the 5-minute mark, there's this big gush, and I think naturally you start thinking about, I don't know what happened to the audio there. It stopped playing. There we go. There's this big gush, and it's okay, well, did a neighbor just flush the toilet or something? Why did that happen? And I guess this is kind of a oral equivalent to there's a video called Dark Sun Squeeze. I screened this in a film series once. I did a group of films about the abject, discarded parts of your body. And this film is basically just a series of shots of a sewage treatment plant. And there's a little clip on it if you wanted to search for it. There's a I'm not going to play it in case you really don't want to see it, but if you're interested, there's a short clip of this film that you can find online. And if you watch just that clip, it's oh my god, that's disgusting. But if you watch the whole 10-minute video, then it becomes weirdly beautiful. I'm kind of fascinated by the idea of everyone's crap just kind of running together, and this recording is bookended by, I start inside our house, and I walk out to the street and record the manhole, and then I walk back in and end with flushing the toilet. So yeah, I'm interested in public-private space, and the idea that you're home and you flush the toilet, and it seems you're in a comfortable place, and you don't have to really think about what happens when you flush the toilet, but you're ejecting part of yourself out into the world, and it's commingling with parts of everyone else that lives in your town. Yeah. Koan number 27. Koan number 1, 3 pounds of flax. So this is one of two Koans, which are koans that I created about canonical Buddhist koans. I wanted to kind of honor the original inspiration for my koans. So one of my favorite Zen koans is Tozen's 3 pounds. A monk asked Tozen when he was weighing some flax, "What is Buddha?" Tozen said, "This flax weighs 3 pounds." There's a alternate translation I've seen that goes, he's asked, "What is Buddha?" Tozen said, 3 pounds of flax. So in that version, it's kind of like he is actually responding to the question, "What is the Buddha?" The Buddha is 3 pounds of flax. And it's kind of like the shit stick koan. What is Buddha? Dried shit stick. And in that translation, it can kind of be interpreted as Tozen is saying the Buddha is 3 pounds of flax because the Buddha is a shit stick and he's whatever. I like this this translation better because his response is it's like a non-response. It's like somebody's like, "What is a Buddha?" And he's like, "I'm in the middle of something. Like, I'm doing something here. This flax weighs 3 pounds. I'm weighing flax. Get out of here." And in that response, it's also, the Buddha is what I'm doing right now. The Buddha is, your daily activity. So, in honor of Tozen's response, I went to the local co-op grocery store where they had flax seed in bulk and filled up a bag of 3 pounds of flax. And I think appropriately, I didn't get it quite right. It's actually 3.1 pounds of flax. In my thesis exhibition, which I haven't really talked about in this retrospective yet, maybe I'll save that for an epilogue or something, but at my exhibition for 108 Koans, I had this 3.1 pounds of flax in a bowl, and I had little baggies that people could take some and take home with them. Not many people actually did that, so I still have this big bag of flax that has survived several moves and is right now, I don't know, stored somewhere in the back of some cabinet in our kitchen. I can't bring myself to throw it away. Koan number 28, Bridge Remix. So Sylvie and I at one point became obsessed with Bridge Mix, which is this chocolate-covered assortment of whatevers. There's all kinds of things you might get in a bag of Bridge Mix, and each brand has different stuff. So I found as many different brands of Bridge Mix as I could and mixed them all together, and then over the course of the next week or whatever, however long it took me, I ate each piece one by one and marked off on a tally what it was. And the caption here, it says, "Counting and classifying, ruining all the fun." So this koan, I think, is partially inspired by the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which has nothing to do with Zen really, but in that book, Persig writes about the way that we classify and categorize our world. He talks about the concept of Phaedrus's knife. You know, we're splitting our world up into different discrete things in order to have any understanding of what's around us, because otherwise everything is just all one thing, which actually maybe relates to Zen, but anyways, you can keep going and going and going in your categorization. So, you know, he talks about having a handful of sand, right? It's been a long time since I've actually read the book, but from what I remember, this may be not completely accurate, but this is my takeaway. You have a handful of sand, and you probably think of that as like one thing, right? It's sand. It's a handful of sand, like a bowl of bridge mix. And you could start categorizing that sand into different colors of sand, different shades of sand, and then you could differentiate different sizes of sand grains and different shapes. And you can keep going and going and going until each individual grain of sand becomes its own category, because each grain of sand is actually unique. So at some point, the categorization becomes useless, or at least not useful to help us have an understanding of the world around us. And the point where you stop categorizing, though, is completely arbitrary. So I think it's useful to consider if there's anything in your life that you have divided into categories that are actually not useful categories, and perhaps might even be actually harmful. So in categorizing all of this bridge mix into milk chocolate and dark chocolate and what was inside it, I essentially ruined the fun for myself of bridge mix, because I couldn't just take a bunch of bridge mix and shove it all in my mouth. At the same time, though, part of the fun of bridge mix is celebrating each individual piece, and like, oh, I got a strawberry jube, or oh, that was a Brazil nut, awesome. So there's like this tension between thinking of something as an entity as a whole and celebrating its individual parts. And you can extrapolate that to all kinds of things. And that, I think, is a concept that does show up in a lot of religions. You know, the idea of everything being embodied in one thing, and one thing containing everything. And finally, for this week, we have Koan number 29, B-roll. So this is, as it says, footage from a gig I had. I used to, when I was freelancing in Kansas City, I recorded this marching band competition and then sold DVDs. And in this particular year, I set it up so that I had one camera on top of the press box that was recording the whole field, just a static shot of the whole field. And then I was down actually on the field and running around getting close-up shots. So that's where the title B-roll comes from in video editing terminology. The B-roll is the shots that you can cut to. You have your main shot, and then if you need to or if you want to, you can cut away to your B-roll footage. So this was my B-roll footage, and in the process of editing this, editing the original footage for the DVDs, what I basically do is take this all this footage. This is one continuous shot. Like, I didn't stop recording it all during the each marching band. I just recorded the whole duration, including me running around. And so I drop that into the video editor, and then I go in and look for, okay, at what point do I actually like keep the camera steady for a shot that's actually usable? And I mark the beginning of that. And then, okay, at this point I start moving again to get a new shot. So I mark out, and that's the usable footage. And then I keep doing that, and all of the little clips in between the usable footage, I just cut out, delete, throw away. And so this is an idea I had for a really long time, actually, before making this Koan. I was always thinking about, what if I actually, instead of throwing away those transitional shots, what if that's the stuff that I kept, and I threw away all the good stuff? It's maybe the trickster in me. I'm really interested in like in between transitional stuff. So I just wanted to like reuse that somehow. I held on to this footage for a long time, and I kind of wanted to like reclaim it from myself, like appropriate myself and recontextualize this like kind of commercial gig as artwork. And so this is the result. I just strung all the unusable footage together, and the result, I think, is much more interesting than if you saw the good shots. So that's it for this week. I'll see you next week for Koans 30 through 39, which is a really nice batch of Koans. So I'll see you then.